Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Dan Baptiste, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. Welcome to Content Disrupted. Today, we're thrilled to talk with Madhukar Kumar, a visionary executive with over 15 years of experience leading global teams at the intersection of data, AI, and business innovation. Feels relevant right now, huh? In his career, Madhukar has spent time as a journalist, a developer, a product leader, a growth marketer. He's now a guest lecturer at Duke and a CMO. All of these experiences give him an incredibly unique lens to view our current, what I would describe as tech-crazed marketing environment. And Madhukar's career has spanned both fast-moving startups and multi-billion-dollar enterprise organizations where he's consistently driven transformational growth. Today, we'll explore how he's done it, and hopefully we can steal some of those ideas and learn what we as marketers can do to replicate some of his success. So Madhukar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and good to see you, Glenn.
Yeah, you as well. I know we were talking earlier, and as you look at how to kind of construct a CMO for this moment, you have a lot of really interesting ingredients. I talked about being a journalist and understanding storytelling and how to communicate with different audiences, being a developer, so that having that deep technical knowledge, going to market with products and marketing those products, and now being a more holistic CMO. Can you talk about kind of how each one of those experiences, like what they've given you and how maybe that's changed your worldview on how you approach the CMO chair today?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was growing up in India, I keep joking about this, that at that time, growing up in India in the 80s, you only had three choices for your career. You could become a doctor, you could become an engineer, or you could be a failure. And I chose failure.
That's a great path.
I didn't want to be a doctor or an engineer, but I enjoyed writing. So I ended up becoming a journalist and, found my way in newspapers like The Pioneer in India, which was started by Winston Churchill, and then later on Hindustan Times, which is one of the largest newspapers in Delhi. I think it still is. So what took me a very long time to understand was I liked the idea, and there's some ego involved a little bit, of creating something from scratch. And that idea is, you have so many thoughts, you observe, and just like you were saying earlier, you live your experiences through your own eyes and your own sensory perceptions, and then you kind of interpret it in a way that is unique to you. And I really enjoyed communicating that on print. But somewhere around 1999, about 2000, when the world exploded, similar to what we're seeing today with World Wide Web, I figured out how to, just go in and create web pages. And then I enjoyed the idea of now telling that story in a brand new medium, because it's no longer words, it's also other things that you can add to make that experience a little bit more immersive. Eventually, that got me into, software engineering. I started writing code. I was also teaching web design, ended up doing my master's in both journalism, but also in software engineering, and then started off in, as an engineer, and then ultimately to product management, and then finally into marketing, and then CMO. The thing I like to say is I like connecting dots, and I'm also quite a learning junkie. I like to pick something up and really get to learn till I hit that inflection point in my mind is like, oh, yeah, okay, now I get it. So I describe myself as a jack of all trade, which has, the ability to go in and learn new things very quickly. So I would say it has taken me a very long time to get to it. But what I really enjoy is just creating stuff, whether it's software, whether it's writing, whether it's application, whether it's a video or telling a story. But today, you cannot do that in isolation unless you also understand what the technology is that makes that happen. So I really enjoy blurring the lines between creativity and technology, because it's kind of the same thing. It's creation of something brand new, but now with a lot more choices. And that's kind of how I ended up here, where I realized that in marketing, especially if you're marketing to technology enthusiasts or even developers, there are very good marketers. They understand the mechanics of marketing, the reach, measurement, and all of that. But what often lacks is the deeper understanding of the product that they're trying to sell. So my premise always has been that to be an effective marketer, it has to be a product-led marketing. And product-led marketing is truly immersive, where you're either the consumer of the product, you use it, you give feedback, or you are so close to the user of the product that you are imbibed it in your day-to-day activities as a marketer.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we think through how to connect with people, and often we have marketers that, specifically in B2B tech, that are trying to better connect with a developer audience and engineers, IT decision makers, things like that. Being a developer and a technologist and now a marketer, I assume that's allowed you to understand that audience really well because it is you to an extent, or at least the former version of yourself. Can you talk about how you've understood the developer and the technology audience, kind of what makes them tick, and maybe some tactics you've used to market to this audience in the past, maybe what's done well and what's failed miserably as you're trying to really connect with these folks?
Yeah, absolutely. And I still like to build applications, especially with now AI. We Things have become so much easier. So I still found a renewed passion in building end-to-end applications. And the reality is, in terms of whether it's a developer or technology audience, I feel, and this is what I try to tell my entire team members, is true empathy is being in the shoes of the user. And it doesn't mean understanding just the pain point, but just living the life. Like, as a developer, how do I discover a product? And do I really wake up and say, okay, I'd love to see a sales pitch or download a white paper about a certain technology before I try? No, that's not what I do, not even for marketing. If I'm looking for something, I would go looking for something on my own, out of my own volition, and then I would go try it out. And if I try it out and I really like it, then the next thing I would do is to try and look for some social confirmation. I do feel that there are a few things about developers that are probably unique to them. They have, or we have, a immunity to sales and marketing. You can quickly understand and figure out what is it as a clear pitch versus what is educational. And at least me, I try to gravitate towards what is educational, or I try and go listen and learn from people who have done something that I'm trying to learn, and they have done it in a proven way. So Twitter is a great place. YouTube has turned out to be a great place. And Google is, of course, changing because now a lot of the learning, at least that I do, is on Perplexity. So, how does that affect my marketing strategy or our marketing strategy? Obviously, it is the end to end journey. The end to end journey then becomes not of an outreach, because that doesn't necessarily work anymore, but it's more of a pull strategy or an inbound strategy. So if I truly believe in the product, which I do, and this is the reason why I love working at SingleStore, then I would use it. I would personally build videos that I think people need to understand. I'll put it on my own YouTube or social media channels. But then I would approach other people who are, they have good following, and see if they would be interested in trying this product out and then talking about it. So that's the core piece of it, is like, am I building something that's useful, and am I doing it through leaders in the space who can then go and talk about it in organic fashion? And then, of course, you have to be in the vision and the watering holes where most of the developers hang out, whether it's Reddit, whether it's Hacker News, whether it's technical conferences. But the end goal is to provide something useful first. Like, an SDK, a starter kit, or things that makes their life easier. And then they discover, oh, this is cool. Let me go try something else. And then the last piece that ties it all together is your branding, because you have to make sure that the entire experience is congruent and consistent and truly reflects your personality as a company and a product. And that permeates all the way from the website to even the product. And I think that's one of the core differences is like, earlier I used to see a lot of people just go in and do MQLs and then hand it to sales or goes to product. And then there's a big difference. I think now product led marketing is putting the product all the way from initial discovery to use and even renewal.
Brings up a question in my mind. You mentioned having a deep understanding of the audience, because you have a lived experience there with developers. If you didn't have that experience, how would you go about fostering empathy? How, like, for your team that maybe isn't developers, like how do they go about having an understanding and putting themselves in the shoes of their audience? Are there tools or tactics that you found effective to help kind of bring that to light for people? Since again, if you don't know who you're talking to and you don't understand their motivations and their behaviors, it becomes really hard to create the value that you just described.
Yeah. So, well, of course, now at my age, I have the privilege of the choice. I would probably not pick a product that I cannot use myself or it doesn't speak to me. But for others, this is completely true in the sense that's where the journalism experience comes in, is to be just curious and ask nonstop questions about how a product is being used and what works and doesn't work. And it has to be a combination of both qualitative and quantitative approach for research. You would talk to the customers, you would try and understand what they say, but also keep in mind that a lot of time the user will not tell you really what they feel. So you have to embellish that with instrumentation because most of the products now have a free product. So there are ways to understand the overall journey, and there are ways to measure each step and figure out what causes a certain behavior. And then based on those hypotheses, you want to run experiments and then iterate on that. That's how you get closer and closer to both the user and empathize with what they do and their, true endorphin points, but also the pain points, and then try to get an experiment with those.
You're talking a little bit about ratio and handoffs and content and channels and things like that. We find ourselves in this pressure cooker of a economy right now where there's so much, push for results and almost like direct response marketing. Can you talk about in that, kind of flies in the face of what you said a moment ago, which is you flock to educational and you're allergic or immune to sales and marketing. Can you talk about the ratio of educational content versus maybe mid and lower funnel content, and how do you approach, stuff that is more conversion oriented to an audience that wants it to be their choice, right? Like you can't just chase people around with offers. So I know you have a really strong perspective when it comes to product led marketing and product led growth. But if you could sort of talk about the philosophies there, the ratio and the importance of almost thinking about the education role equally as important, or is it equally as important as some of the more downstream activities?
Yeah, so the education role, I would say, is specific to the developer audience or specific to the tech audience. That is not necessarily true for other audiences. Let's say if you were marketing to real estate agents or maybe marketing to somebody who is, a independent merchant. Education is going through a massive change itself, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So earlier, a lot of the SEO content was top of the funnel and how-tos and educational stuff. And people game that and they're still trying to do it with massive AI generated content. That by itself is going through a massive disruption. And it's going to take some time, but I do think that whole idea of Googling something about a certain topic and then seeing the top result of, let's say WebMD, for example, that will eventually go away because now Google AI overviews or Perplexity, that will give you the answer and with citations. So the educational piece, I think, is going to happen a lot more by their users' own volition, but more and more through AI. So, what becomes important then is that this mid funnel to the lower funnel content. And there, I think it is becoming incredibly important on the message of that story, but also who tells that story. So, here's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that the amount of content on the internet has probably tripled or gone up by 20x since AI came out because a lot of people are just using AI content and it's the exact same mediocre vanilla content that people see everywhere. And we as humans are very good at understanding what is AI content or not. And so I would ask you, would you continue reading an article that you think is very, plain vanilla or uses the word that ChatGPT uses? And the answer is no. So you're looking for identity, you're looking for human elements. And that's where I think the middle of the funnel and who tells that story matters, which is why now you see a lot more influencers and a lot more people who have followers. They're getting bigger and bigger because they have their own voice. But at the same time, now, at least in tech, founders are trying to become influencers. And funny enough, the influencers are now trying to become founders.
Got to make money somehow. Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think the educational piece only works if you're talking to developers or certain audiences. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody else. What works for everybody else is a unique voice and the content of the message, not just plain vanilla AI generated.
Yeah, I mean, we are 100% on the same page there. I think what we've seen is what's referred to as like commoditized searches, where there's a consensus answer. It's all over the internet. It already exists. That's not going to A, benefit you, or B, drive traffic. Like the days of saying, okay, I can also answer that, and maybe somehow magically I'll get the answer back. The challenge becomes, how do I add to the conversation? And as we're thinking about, to your point, voices of founders or the community saying like, oh, how do we take this to the next level? And can that be my platform? But again, I have to think about the guardrails of like, where do I have the right to play? Why am I pulling these folks together? How close is it to my product area or my product itself? And really start to aspire to be the leading voice, which is kind of opposite to the fact of what you just described, which is like gaming an SEO system to say like, okay, how do I just create a bunch of individual things that, fingers crossed, drive organic traffic to my website, which that strategy is quickly starting to fall apart from what we're seeing.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I've been seeing as well. That people are using AI automation and AI tools to generate content, and it's based on that same content that AI has been trained on. So there's a content dilution problem that's happening. And that's where I think it becomes more and more important for a pull versus a push approach. More and more people would realize that, okay, I'm looking for something specific, and they'll gravitate towards something that speaks to them, not something that is high volume but low quality.
Yeah, I mean, said in a different way, but the same concept is like the content matters and it has to be unique and interesting and valuable and kind of true to the platform you're trying to build and the leadership position you're trying to build and the future you're trying to sort of help usher in. It's like this generic content, like, I give that example of the kids book. Like, what if everybody did this? Like, if everybody's doing AI content, like fast forward a year from now, like the internet sucks, like it feels like a bunch of belly fat ads or like, you might also like those like, content surrounding of stuff that you would never click on or read. And that becomes Google. So it's really just an interesting dynamic environment where some of like the core pillars of content and marketing and human connection, like, Google itself, it's kind of interesting to see where that company and that platform goes holistically because their entire revenue model is monetizing traffic and click-throughs in a lot of ways and through advertising. So, kind of play that out. And if that's not happening at the frequency that goes, like they're also going to have kind of an interesting challenge as an enterprise when you look at the amount of revenue they're reliant on in a behavior that they're actually changing and disrupting. So it's kind of interesting to see all of that play out in real time as well. I guess we've gone this far without you describing your current role and what you do. I guess it's useful to understand because I think in the context of where we are in marketing, what you do and your approach to data is really interesting and relevant. So if you want to take a step back and talk about what you do at SingleStore and maybe what some of the key initiatives are that you're trying to solve as a marketer, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'm the chief marketing officer at SingleStore. SingleStore is a database. It used to be called MemSQL. Now it's SingleStore, and you can think of it as a database that can do millisecond response times of all queries across petabytes of data. So it's really falls into two audience spectrum. One is the day-to-day developers that's building any AI app, any full stack application, or it could be some very large company, like very large financial services company or security company, where you want to react to real-time data, which is happening quite a lot, and be able to use it for either making decisions or having AI make decisions, because now with real-time AI, that has really taken off. So my role as a CMO is to do two things. Of course, have a direct impact on the revenue. And this is a classic B2B, but it also has now some B2C aspect to it. And the goal is to be able to both talk to developers, which are the users, but also to the buyers and effectively move the needle across revenue. We just crossed about $100 million a few months ago. We passed that now, and we're growing at a healthy rate. So my job is to help continue drive that, but also do a lot more inbound, which is the whole pull factor, and combine all of this with technology, which is where I guess my sweet spot is. I love to use a bunch of different tools, automation, and turn that into a fine-tuned machine that generates growth.
And, as you think of your big bets and maybe how what are the pillars of this pull strategy that you're describing? Like, obviously you've done this in a few different times. So, what have you seen be highly effective, and how are you approaching it differently in today's environment than maybe you would have at a previous organization?
Yeah, so I try to simplify everything just so that my brain can consume it in an easy way and then implement it. Then, just like a developer, then you add more features to it. So let me first give you an example of a pull, right? So this happened to me, so I always lean on this. I, of course, have a conversation with people walk up to me, and then, I start asking questions. So in one of these conferences, it was a room full of, I think about 100 or so, all buyers. And everybody had their business cards on or their LinkedIn profile on their phone, and they were going around and trying to pitch everybody else on who they are, what they do, and try to book a meeting. And it was just not for me. So I was just, awkwardly standing, looking at my phone. But I did have a speaking session. So I got on the stage, I did my presentation. And surprisingly, after the presentation, when there was a break, there were about 10, 15 people who came to me and asked what the company does, what we do. And a few of them turned into meaningful conversation that later on, had a movement associated with it. So this is the pull factor. This is what I mean by the pull factor, in the sense, if you have something interesting to say and you have conviction of the product and the product is really good, then find a stage, find a watering hole where you can deliver that message. But again, it only works if your message is good and it's convincing and resonates. Doesn't matter if it resonates with a million people. What matters is if it resonates with one, two, or three who can make that difference for you. So, from that perspective, the way I think about all the marketing strategy falls under three pillars: there's pipeline build, there's PLG, and then there's branding. And all of these, I have different owners for these, right? So, in my world, what I like to do is to have branding really own the perception of the product and the experience and the company. And if you do that as a really good way, finding the right stages and telling that brand story, it's going to drive pipeline, it's going to drive usage, trials, free trials, PLG, and some PLG will move over to pipeline as well. So now it's a matter of building three different engines and adding the intersections between them or pipelines between them and running experiments to keep iterating. That's the way I look at it and how I go about doing it.
Can you describe PLG or product-led growth for folks who may not be as familiar with it? I know it's a key pillar of yours.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it. So I live in the Bay Area. One of the things we do every Sunday is go to a farmer's market, and then there is a bunch of different fruit stalls. And the guy who does the best is somebody who has all his fruit cut out and put it in small paper cups, and he makes these funny remarks and rhymes and hands out these fruits, and he has the biggest crowd of people coming in and buying those fruit. Now the few that's exactly what PLG is. Now you can be funny and you can have a good message, but ultimately if you're not offering the fruit for people to try it out, that doesn't work. Second, if that fruit is bad, people are not just not going to have it. Next time they won't even try it. But that's the effective way of how you do product led growth. You put the product out, let people try it. If they like it, then you make that journey exactly consistent and similar to the rest of it. All the way from, even retention. Like if you really like that product, you would come back week over week to say, hey, I liked it last week. Now let me go try something new. And so that feeds on itself. It's a virtuous cycle. So in technology, it is PLG is a free trial. There are different ways to offer free trial. And I now see it also permeating in services too, right? Where people would say, okay, just try my services for free for 30 days or one meeting. And if you like it, sure, let's talk about how do we go to the next step. That in essence is PLG.
And how do you think about the guardrails there? Like, so whether it's a services approach or a product approach, obviously you need to create enough value for somebody to kind of make the leap to continue the relationship, but you don't want that necessarily to, overextend yourself where people can have every experience they need without buying, or maybe do. I don't know. Like, how do you think about that boundary to motivate the behavior that you're looking for?
Yeah, so this works most of the time if the product has a good self-service component to it. Now, just going back to the fruit example, if it's an apple and you have already cut it up and you're offering it in a cup, that works because then me as a buyer just pick it up and I eat. But if the product involves skinning the fruit, cleaning it, and doing a bunch of different stuff on my behalf, it's also expensive for the seller and even more expensive for me. Then PLG does not work. So the moral of the story is if it has a self help component to it, and number two, it has near zero cost, then PLG works for you. If not, then you could probably do it, but at a much lower scale. But then your returns have to be much higher on.
Yeah.
That's the way I lens it.
As you've thought about PLG and the evolution of PLG, the concept of like freemium and things like that within software has been around for a while. How has PLG evolved over the last, like, let's say 3 to 5 years, or even in the past year itself with this tech boom? Has it changed? Are there any like key drivers that folks need to pay attention to? And I guess it would be both on the offering side on how people are executing PLG strategies, but also on the buyer side? Like, are there expectations of buyers that are changing that people need to pay attention to? Can you talk about those two sides of the coin and maybe what trends are looking like?
Yeah, so there are a few things that I've seen from a buyer side. I feel with Keystone technology, it's not table stakes. So if you don't have a free version or free for certain time, then it even hurts your brand. Because if I now go and look for a product where I don't have a trial, but instead I fill out a long form and it says somebody from sales is going to get back to me, I'll never do that. So that's one of the big changes, that it's become table stakes. And then from a seller perspective, I think what I see is there's a lot more technology involved now. And if you don't architect it well in terms of the overall experience, the entire experience fails. What I mean by that is, let's say your product is on a separate island altogether. Now you create a sign up button in WordPress, you have some sort of an authentication in some other system, and now you are, looking at usage maybe in your trial. If they're all not well thought out and it's not connected, then you would not learn from it and you would continue to make more and more mistakes. You would not even be able to scale from it too. And then the other piece is not everybody does PLG right, in the sense you might have a marketing team, you might have a product management team and an engineering team, and they're all doing their own thing. It's not connected. But more importantly, when you do certain things in a certain way, the consequences are very different. So, for example, if I put out a really great product and it's completely free and it's free for life and it's also open source, there's no chance that I will have a higher conversion. If, on the other hand, I give a flavor for all the enterprise features, but I make the smaller commercial features free and then have guardrails everywhere so that if you want to try out those things, then you go to the next step. In other words, there's a gradation of experience. Those work well. And then the third thing is cost. Like, it's no longer about growth at all costs. It's okay, you now have 100,000 people using your free product. Is it costing you $1 million? And if it is, then figure out a way to reduce that to near zero. Because at the end of the day, it'll be how much marketing dollars you spend to get the revenue out of it.
It's really interesting as well as we think about adoption and kind of people leveraging technology today. There's this rush to implement AI, but there's also a huge caution with organizations, which there should be, what is this used for? How does this expose us? So it's creating this swirl of confusion in the market. There's also misunderstanding of what AI can and can't do and how to deploy it. It's almost like you hear people saying like, "Oh, well, we have this like one size fits all AI, and can't we just like AI the problem?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's really interesting and confusing, specifically for folks who aren't technologists and don't have a developer background." What we're seeing is almost everything that can be enabled with some semblance of generative AI in the next, year to 2 years. If it's not already there, it's going to be there because it's just so transformational. So then it becomes, how do you build specific applications for use cases that kind of leverage both data and modern AI and large language models to kind of get to an outcome? But do you have a philosophy that you can help to maybe people that are confused about how to think about the path forward when it comes to software? Like, is it should be general use, or is it more application based where we can say, hey, this is a specific use of AI and technology and workflows for media. Here's content marketing. And, so how are you thinking about this world playing out so that folks can understand it?
Yeah, so maybe I'm being too simplistic, but the way I think about it is, if I have a solution, then I look for a problem and see if I can fix that problem with the solutions? Or do I start with what are some of the things that I do, and not necessarily a problem, but I can do 100x with this new tool. So to me, it falls in that category. I was very excited about AI, still am. I've tried so many tools. I joke that I probably spend my salary in paying all these new AI tools every month. But the reality is, it has to be tied to what do you do on a day-to-day basis, and asking the question, can I make it 100x better, faster, cheaper? So from my perspective, I think of everything that I do in four different buckets. One is repetitive tasks, like, we are looking at contacts, we're trying to enrich the data, we're trying to clean the data, and then do some sort of personalized messaging. That's one trivial example. So that bucket falls under automation. Can I use AI automation to do that not in a day or two, but in a few minutes? The second one is creativity. I think with creativity, I like to think that, when AI is hallucinating, and when we don't like it, we say it's hallucinating. And when we do like it, we call it creative. But I do think there are certain tools in AI that really helps you get over your mental block, and get over to give you new ideas that you can work upon, which would have taken me days to think through. We do have a billboard, and the billboard and 101, and we keep rotating it every month. And I don't use AI to give me the billboard ideas, but I often, do research around certain topics and ideas using AI, and it opens up your vision to different things. So that's the second part, is creativity. Can I use tools like Midjourney, HeyGen, Synthesia to, just supercharge the creativity for the entire team? The third piece for me is the data analysis piece, because truly to do PLG and product led sales and product led marketing, you have to have the data and a hypothesis before you run an experiment. And so that's where AI tools are very, very useful. You can literally, and I was in school pretty bad at math. So I can literally now run a private model in my own laptop. I can give it a CSV and make it generate charts and continuously ask questions that would have been so hard if I always went to the marketing ops team. And then the last piece, which I love, is these no code application building. I can build a landing page and a form without paying anybody, and create clickable prototypes end to end without talking to anybody. And then once I understand the user journey, I understand the pain points and where to fix it, then you take it to design. So now you've cut down the design times, involvement, and sped up that entire process of a brand new project that you might be running under brand by orders of magnitude. So those are the four different categories I think of. I have a bunch of tools associated with it that I keep exploring and using, and there's some sort of methodology as part of that. In fact, a lot of the startup founders and other marketers that I talk to, they say, "Hey, can you teach me all of these things?" And I'm thinking about just putting all of that into a structure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This sort of broad pressure, this like broad AI pressure, has kind of created this rush to deploy AI, and I think most of the issue comes when you don't have those elements in place. Like, what are we doing? And then do we know like what is the problem we're trying to solve or the opportunity we're looking to go at? Instead, it's like, how do we just deploy AI holistically in all of these places? And oftentimes you have, what we're seeing is almost like SEAL teams that are disconnected from the business, that are like AI councils that aren't even in touch with the end use cases and the problems to be solved. And they're just saying, like, all right, we're evaluating AI and how we're going to use it in this organization, often not even talking to the people who have the problems. So are you seeing that as a liability, given the importance of having that infrastructure and that methodology in place before you start solutioning? Like, how do folks reconcile that so they can have thoughtful conversations and debates internally with teams that may not be operating with the kind of the right mindset here?
There's such a wide spectrum of different companies, different people, and the different challenges that they have. On one hand, I've seen people who are using AI very effectively for their jobs to be done, so to speak. And then there are others who are kind of like what you just said, where they are just trying to answer the question, how can I use AI? So it varies depending on the industries as well as different people that I talk to. In technology side, definitely I see a lot of people enthused and try out a bunch of new products. But I also see a fatigue of, oh, I already have, and I'm speaking from pain point of a CMO. We already have like 20 plus tools that we use. Now you're telling me I need one more to do something that might be useful. So this is so true in marketing that when quality becomes quantity, it's no longer useful. So as a marketer, you have to constantly figure out new and creative ways to uplevel your quality every single time. And if AI helps you with that, so be it. That's how I would think about
How do we overcome this fatigue? Because obviously, like the industry and the solutions are evolving so fast. And to your point, as a marketer, you're like, oh God, do I have to like deploy another new tool? I mean, yeah, maybe you enjoy it because you're doing that on Saturdays, but for the rest of the world, especially folks who have a huge pain point in trying to bring software into their organizations, like how do you judge the risk reward of bringing new solutions in when you're kind of like overwhelmed and fatigued by all of the messages and the innovation and the point solutions in market? Like how do marketers overcome that?
Yeah, that's where I think this is a shift I'm seeing, and maybe it'll become more prominent or not, which is it almost feels like an attack on all our senses, sensory attack. So our internal defense system then goes back into pulling things that we want. Instead of me constantly going into social media and just letting it feed my brain, I now tend to use AI to do things that I want or look for things that I'm interested in. Like even the chat GPT thing with the voice. I just don't go there to go and say, hey, what's happening in the world, or tell me what my social media feed looks like. I go and ask something specific, and then I go deeper and deeper into that. And I think that's the core, I would say, meta level thinking that the defensive mechanism ultimately might go towards is figure out what is it that you want to do. And then there'll be no dearth of tools to try. But I almost like switch myself off to what people are trying to push to me versus me using my own willpower to see what I need to do and then figure out what tools exist. So I think that's one way to look at that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because now we're dealing with the kind of that meta mindset in psychology of folks, how they make decisions and how decisions are kind of triggered and how we're feeling with the volume of solutions that are in market and opportunities. So, certainly more to come. And I guess to that point, as we wrap here, things are moving so fast. When you think of where we are today, and you look out a year from now, or God forbid, 5 years from now, like where do you see the industry headed? And what can marketers and marketing leaders start to put in place foundationally to get in a better position so that they're less on their heels and kind of like cautious and concerned and more like, okay, I can get back into, building something meaningful here. Like, how do I understand the future and what are some of the building blocks that I need to start putting in place in order to be successful in that future?
Yeah, I wouldn't be that bothered about the future because the future keeps changing so much and all of us have very little control over it. So that's one of the things that as I've grown older, I've come to realize is you can be a product of the environment, or somehow you can affect the environment with positive things that you want to do. So, from that perspective, I always lean towards what's my curiosity driving me towards? What is it that I want to learn about and do things differently? Now, that has to be done in the context of what is currently happening and might happen in the future. But at the end of the day, I feel like whether it's AI or other humans, they might be better than me or others on doing certain things. But one thing that nobody else can take away from any marketer, including myself, is my own view of the world, my own voice, and my interpretations of all the different things that's happening around me in a very specific, personalized way. And if I stay honest to that, I think it should be okay. It should be, you're not always a defensive thing that, oh my God, now somebody else is also writing. It doesn't matter. And so I know it's a kind of a wishy washy answer, maybe, but at the end of it, I would say listen to the voice in your head and stay true to that and use the tools you have to make it better.
I think that's great insight as we all kind of get stuck in the chaos of the moment. If you can take a step back and say, listen, I'm brought here to lead this organization, to matter to my customers, to put myself in their shoes and do that within all the things that are happening in this moment, and the channels that are up and down. So how do I find my voice in the current climate and build something meaningful? So I think that's a great point to wrap on. Any last final thoughts for those that are feeling stuck? I mean, every time you've hopped into an organization, you've helped drive that hockey stick growth. For folks that maybe are like in neutral, and trying to get back to that growth mindset, any final advice for folks in marketing leaders?
Yeah, I would say going back to the base principles of simplify everything to a point which sticks in your mind, and then try and solve that problem and see how it's connected to the others. And then in that process, figure out a framework that works for you. Don't listen to experts, don't listen to me. Do what you think is right for that organization at that point based on your experience and the context. That is what consistently works.
Excellent. Well, loved this conversation. Thank you so much. You've brought a lot of unique thinking, and really started to simplify what is a very complicated ecosystem and environment. So, Madhukar, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and thanks for giving us all of your secrets and insights, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Good chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. To stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing, visit our website at skyward.com. That's skyword.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling.